had to record a couple of versions before this one, simply because the information keeps changing so rapidly. So it's difficult for us to keep up and then record a video and edit it and then get it to you. So apologize for the tight timeframes that we're about to ask of you. But there's a bill in front of the federal parliament. It started off as the hate speech bill that you might have heard of. It contains some firearms provisions. Because both the Liberal Party and the Greens decided they didn't want to support that bill, the government has thrown away all the hate speech stuff, and now the bill contains just firearms provisions. And so that means that we're only talking about firearms in the federal parliament, and unfortunately that means it's highly likely that the Greens will support the firearms bill. Now, that doesn't mean that all hope is lost, because there's a lot of the situation is very fluid and fast moving. So that's why I'm sending you this, and that's why I'm asking you to take action. So I'm going to go through the provisions in the bill that we're most concerned about, and at the end of that, I'm going to ask you to take a specific set of actions so that we can have some effect on the federal parliament. But you need to do it very quickly. Once you've watched this video, there's some links in the description below to follow and take action after the end of that. But we'll talk about that at the end of the video. Let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about is the timeframes. They gave us a draft bill on Tuesday morning last week, and it was 144 pages long. It was the hate speech bill, but there were firearms provisions in it. We had to read through all of that, sort out the firearms stuff, and make a submission by late Thursday afternoon, which we managed to do. And then since then, we've been trying to work our way through the firearms stuff in more detail and work out what we should do. And while we've been trying to do that, the whole, with the rest of the industry and everybody else, the whole bill has been changing, and the situation has changed to the point where they got rid of the hate speech, which you've seen. So the timeframes are incredibly compressed. They want to debate the bill next Tuesday and Wednesday. They've recalled Parliament specially for it. So we're looking at something that is an incredibly short period of time to discuss what is a complex area of public policy, i.e. firearms. It's important that we get it right, because if you don't, things can get very dangerous because we're dealing with firearms, and they haven't taken the time to consider these things properly. Secondly, there was a public hearing by the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence and Security. A lot of pro-gun groups were invited to that hearing. We were not. So we weren't invited, and we weren't allowed to appear either. No gun groups were invited, and there were a bunch of other people invited to talk about the hate speech side of it. But on the firearms side, we weren't invited. We did make a submission to them, but we weren't invited to it. Right, next up is what they call ammunition equipment. So as we all know, there are things that as competitive shooters or hunters that we use to carry ammunition. So in the case of, say, trap shooters at a shotgun event, they have the vests, and the vest might carry 50 rounds. Some of our target events use a belt, and a belt might carry magazines or individual cartridges, depending on the discipline that you're doing. And if you're hunting, particularly if you're looking for pigs or goats in large numbers, you'd have something that can help you carry quite a lot of ammunition, maybe a pouch or whatever it is. All of that stuff will be stopped from importation. So they're trying to ban all of that. So they're trying to ban the vests Olympic shooters wear. They're trying to ban belts and cartridge belts that we might use in Western action, or that or IPSC might use magazine carrying belts, things like that. It's just ridiculous. They have genuine use, and really they're hurting a whole bunch of sporting shooters in the process of achieving nothing in terms of public safety. So that's the second point. And we'll move on now to the third point. Okay, the third thing is use of a carriage service. Use of a carriage service means using the internet. And what the government's trying to do here is to prevent people using the internet to look up how to print 3D firearms and looking up the print files and all of those things for them. Now, I think most of us would agree that's a good thing. Most states have or many, if not most states, have already outlawed the use of 3D printing of firearms. We agree that's a good thing. Fewer illegal firearms is a good thing. The problem with the way they've worded it is the way they've worded it. It's so broad that it could capture looking up reloading information, for instance, or a manual for your firearm, or anything like that. Like just the most mundane things that we go about doing as shooters, how to adjust the trigger on a Tika or whatever it is, right? By looking these things up, you might be in breach of the clause in the way that it's written, and the penalties are quite severe. So that needs to be modified. It just shows you the rushed nature of the bill, that they haven't thought all of these things through, and even when we've pointed them out, well, the bill's already half written. So hopefully they'll go back and redraft that, because a lot of these points were in our submission, but we need you to back us up as well. Right, the next one is the right of appeal. The government is trying to improve the sharing of information between ASIO and other intelligence services at the federal level with state police forces. Now, I think that's a good thing. That will reduce the number of people of dubious character who are able to pass the fit and proper person test, and therefore shouldn't get a firearms license in the first place. And you'll remember from the Bondi shooting that one of the shooters had a firearms license, and they actually shouldn't have. He should not have passed the fit and proper person test because his son was associating with a terror group. Now, there's some unusual stuff about the way that license was granted. It took 3 years. Normally, a firearms license in New South Wales, 3 to 6 months. So it's not clear why it took so long, and in the end, what made the decision that he should have a firearms license occur. Premier Minns knows, but he's not telling anyone. So he needs to reveal that, just so that we all know the truth. But in the meantime, they're trying to improve the process so that that's a better flow of information. Now, the problem with the way they've done it is that they have removed what is called the merit review. And the merit review is a way of reviewing an adverse intelligence finding. So if they come back to you and say, I'm sorry, sir, you failed the fit and proper person test because you had an adverse intelligence finding, if you want a review process, you have to go and get a judicial review. And that's expensive. You need lawyers, everything else like that. They've removed merit review. Merit review is being able to go to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal and argue your case there, and that is easier and cheaper. Now, the reason they've done that is because they're trying to protect the sources of intelligence, criminal and intelligence and the like. And that's fair, right? Because you remember, the people who are providing us with information are working with us as Australians and trying to protect their fellow Australians. That's a good thing. So we need to protect the sources. But in fact, the best place to protect those sources and deal with those intelligence information is in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, because they're able to arrange their processes there. It's a lot more informal, and they're able to arrange their processes to protect the sources. It's also, as I said before, cheaper and easier for us. So it's the best of both worlds. They need to bring back the merit reviews that they're trying to remove. So we'll be writing to people, we'll be writing to ministers and everything else, asking them to re-include that. Okay, next is the bill bans some particular firearms, the import of particular firearms. So the federal government can't ban a firearm. They don't have the power to do that. Only states can do that. But they can ban the importation of that. And some of the stuff they're banning at the moment is straight pulls. So the Beretta straight pulls, for instance, and also, but caught up in that, because the definition is a linear action, caught up in that is pump action rifles. And, pump action rifles have not been the problem, but neither have straight pulls, to be honest. I mean, again, the terrorists should have had no rifles. We shouldn't be arguing about the type of rifles that they had. And both of those, straight pulls and pump action rifles, have a use case, as we all know. So, if you're coming across a group of animals like pigs in a herd, you want to eliminate as many of them as possible, as quickly as possible, and as accurately as possible as well. So a straight pull or a pump action rifle is a great option in that case. Getting rid of those, or trying to ban the importation of those, won't stop people having them, because there's already a number in Australia. But what we will see is that they'll just get more expensive, more difficult to get. Eventually, we'll see an increase in the production of Australian-made pump actions. There are Australian-made pump action rifles, and so they will become more popular, no doubt, over time, because that's the only option. So it just bans the importation of things like your Winchesters, your Beretta, BRX, those sorts of things. And a Winchester make a straight pull, a pump action that we actually did a little bit of review on, which you can have a look at. Anyway, that's what this bill does, is it bans the importation of certain types of firearms. Again, there's no justification for it, because the types of firearms people use isn't the problem. Letting them have firearms in the first place is the problem, and this bill doesn't address that. And the last thing is a buyback scheme, or funding the buyback scheme. So when governments go to Parliament and ask for money, that's called an appropriation. And this bill makes an appropriation for a buyback scheme. It doesn't list a dollar amount. It doesn't talk about how much, or even any rules about what should be bought back and what shouldn't, or what the terms are, or anything like that. Now, we don't want a buyback. Right? We don't think there's any need for a buyback because there's no problem with the laws as they currently stand. Firearms laws were adequate to protect us against that Bondi attack. They just weren't properly enforced. Now, even though we oppose the buyback, if there is going to be a buyback, there should be certain provisions associated with it. The first is that it should be fair market value. Right? If they're going to, it shouldn't be like the thievery that occurred in Western Australia, where they just made up some random amounts and people just had to take what they were given or sell their guns into the eastern states. Now, that won't work here that won't work in this case because Western Australia, relatively small market, they were able to sell firearms into the eastern states, all their accessories, ammunition, everything else, into the eastern states. And the eastern states were largely able to absorb any extra. Now, they still bought back a lot of firearms, but a lot were sold interstate. Obviously, if you're doing a national buyback, that can't happen, right? Because there's no other market, outside market. So it needs to be fair market value. And that fair market value just terms is in line with the federal constitution as well. And they need to conform with the federal constitution, in my view. Secondly, they need to buy back ammunition and scopes and all the other accessories, reloading gear, all of that sort of stuff. If they're going to do a buyback, and we don't think they should again, but if they're going to do it, it should be fair and it should include all of the accessories. The reason for that is to prevent them flooding out into the criminal market. So if you've got one of the things that criminals find it hard to access is ammunition. If you've suddenly got all of this banned ammunition floating around and going out into the back market, suddenly criminals have ready access to ammunition, far more ready than they've had previously. If you have reloading gear floating out into the criminal market, then they can manufacture their own ammunition. Again, that's a bad outcome. So it needs to take into account all of that sort of stuff and the money that we as shooters have expended into our firearms that we purchased legally and in total and full conformance with state laws and regulations. Okay, so again, we'll talk about that in our letters as well, that if they're going to have a buyback, there's no need to have a buyback, but if they're going to have one, it should be fair and it should cover all of those things: firearms, accessories, ammunition, and also loss of business, because a number of firearms businesses are going to lose either part or all of their business, and that needs to be compensated as well. Now, all of these things were covered in the 1996 buyback. Prime Minister Albanese keeps saying how he is going to do a 96 style buyback, fine. But if he's going to do that, he needs to recognise that it covered firearms, accessories, ammunition, and business loss. And this needs to be the same. And make sure it's true, that should be included in the legislation to get it through, because I think that's a reasonable thing, and I think we'd all agree that that's fair. Okay, so where are we at politically? At the moment, with the Greens, the government probably has the numbers to pass this bill unamended. That doesn't mean they will, and it doesn't mean they're not open to sensible amendments, especially if enough of us point out the flaws and they see the volume of protest against the bill they're proposing. So it's really important that you take action and write a letter in, and we'll talk about that in just a few seconds. But the Liberal Party, to their credit, unlike in New South Wales, the Federal Liberal Party is actually opposing this bill. The National Party, they've been consistent right through Western Australia, New South Wales, and now into the federal parliament. They are also opposing the bill. One Nation, and there's a couple of independents in the lower house. So Bob Katter in Queensland, we all know Bob and the Hat, he's opposing the bill, but also Rebecca Sharkey from Mayo in South Australia. So there's a few independents. Not sure what the Teals are doing. The Greens, hopeless as you'd expect, and the Labor Party is not being friendly at this point. But weight of numbers, getting our letters in and making our voice heard can have an effect, and we'll talk about that in just a sec. Right. So what are we going to do, or what do we want? There's two things we want. The first is a Senate review. So we want the bill to come into the Senate. It probably will pass pretty easily in the lower house because the government's got the majority down there, the Labor Party. And even though the Liberal Party and some independents will be opposing it in the lower house, it's going to get through there because the government's supporting it. So the real battle's in the Senate. And in the Senate, what we're asking for is a Senate review. So the Senate will refer it to a committee that they set up. It's called a select committee. They will review this bill and only this bill, and then recommend amendments or whatever else. But that will slow the process down a little bit. It will allow everybody to make rational submissions. It will allow us to go into greater detail in our submission. When we won't be rushed, and everyone will be able to consider all of the implications of the proposals that they're making and put arguments for and against each one of them. That really hasn't happened in any great... I mean, we talked earlier about the timeframes and how they've been so compressed. Well, so that really hasn't happened. It needs to happen, and the best process to do that is a Senate review. It doesn't have to take too long, maybe a month and a half, but it needs to be quicker than a few days, which is what we've had. So that's what the first thing we're going to ask for, a Senate review. The second thing we're going to be asking for is some amendments. Now, it will be all of those, it will relate to all of the points I've just talked about. So we're asking for the Senate review to overcome the unfair timeframes. We're asking for ammunition equipment to be removed from the bill because it just doesn't make sense. It's so ridiculous they would ban Olympic shooting vests in Australia. Use of the carriage service, tighten the definition up so that we do in fact make it much more hard to produce a 3D printed firearm, but we don't catch the mundane activity of looking up a reloading chart or anything else like that. Rights of appeals, we want to reinstall the merit-based appeal. We're looking to overturn the bans on the particular firearms, such as straight pulls and pump action rifles, because there's no need for those, right? We can manage any concerns with that through the licensing process that we already have. Then there's the buyback scheme. Of course, it should be fair. We're asking for an amendment to that to include the requirement for it to be fair, to include business compensation, just terms, all of that sort of thing. So they're the amendments that we want. I'll be writing separately to the Parliament to outline exactly what amendments we want, but you can add those things into your letters, and there's a draft letter and everything else, which we'll talk about now. Okay, so now it's time for you to take action. You're just about at the end of the video. When you stop watching this, it's time to get some work done. I apologize for the time frame. It's not our fault. The federal government has compressed the timeframes, as we talked about earlier. So it's quite urgent that you get this done this weekend or Monday at the latest. Now, I know we're all busy. We've all got shooting. Shooting clubs on Sunday. We've got families, everything else. But this half an hour or an hour it might take you to get this done at most is critically important. So there's two things. The first one is sign the petition. So Senator Bridget McKenzie who's a strong supporter of shooting, has been her whole time in Parliament. She's from Victoria, is a shooter herself, shoots shotgun. She's got a petition going. The link for it is in the description below. Click on that, sign the petition. That's step one. Step two is follow another link down below that will take you to a SSAA website. There you'll find a number of things. Firstly, some links so you can write to your local federal member in the lower house. Now, there's a link there that will help you find out at the AEC site where your electorate is, what electorate you live in and who your member is. So follow that link, find out your local member. Secondly, there's a link to the Federal Parliament website that will help you find your senator for your state, or senators, right? So each state has 12. Some will be Liberal, some will be Labor, some will be Greens, maybe a One Nation senator or two. In Tasmania, there's some independents, I think. So you'll find all of those lists in the links that we have on our webpage. So click on the link to our webpage, follow the instructions there. There's some dot points you can use to write your own letter, and writing your own letter is much better if you can just sit down, use the dot points as a basis, write out your letter in your own words. Again, as we say over and over, it doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be War and Peace. It doesn't need to be a legal argument. Just some points about what you think. And if you can do that, it's far more effective than sending in a form letter. However, if you're so pressed for time that you can't send in a form letter, you can't write your own letter, there's a form letter that you can use that says everything we need it to say, right? So please, though, if you can, just use the dot points to write your own letter. You can use AI. if you want. That makes it a little bit easier for those of you that are familiar with how to use AI. And then you can write your own letter. That's the most effective thing. In the absence of that, use the form letter, but please write that letter into the Prime Minister. We'll link his email address as well down below. Oh, sorry, on the SSAA webpage, which is linked down below. So there'll be your federal member of parliament, help you find that. Your states or territory senators, there'll be a link to help you find that. The Prime Minister, there'll be a link to get his email address. Write your letter, send it to all of those people. And if you can do that by Monday, sometime Monday night, that would be the best possible thing. Right? The thing we've got going for us here, remember, is our numbers. The number of people who write in, the more that do it, the better. I know a lot of you don't feel confident doing it. I know a lot of you don't want to get political, but politics has caught us. It's come after us, and now we've got to engage in it. And even if it's just for half an hour today, get it done, send it in. So step 1, petition. Step 2, letter. I'll leave that with you. All the links that you need are in the description below. So the petition is linked in the description below, and then there's a link to our SSAA webpage, which will have all the other links and the dot points or form letter that you might want to use to get that letter in. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you for taking action in advance. This is the best, most useful thing you can do is to follow that action. Take the links, fill out the forms, send the letters, fill out the petition. I'll leave you to do that now. Thanks very much. See you later.